The windows of the aging steam-powered cab rattled terribly as it sped along the rural dirt roads north of London. Tarred macadam roads seemingly hadn't made it this far from the bustling streets of the capital and its overpopulated urban areas. "Ever left London before, huh?" queried the chatty countryside cab driver. Beatrice's gaze caught the driver's in his rear-view mirror. "Once or twice," she responded, not wanting to engage in small talk. "Oh, I see," he mumbled. He noticed she was scribbling something in a small notebook lying flat on her knee. "You up here for work, huh?" he continued, oblivious to her desire for silence. "Uh-huh, that's right," she responded tersely, this time without looking up from her notebook. It was only partially true that she was there for work. However, she had answered abruptly, hoping to end the conversation. "Oh, I see," the cab driver repeated. Beatrice had journeyed from London to participate in a gala hosted by her company. By profession, she was a journalist, but she would be attending the gala that night as a guest. The event was primarily for investors, and rumours had spread that the company's owner would be giving a speech. About what, however, no one knew. Beatrice had been excited to be invited and looked forward with anticipation and curiosity to hearing the speech. She looked up out of the window to see the quickly setting sun. Its red-hued rays broke through the soft dappling of clouds, painting the sky with a breathtaking aura. "What do you do, huh?" the cab driver asked. She had only been in the cab for 5 minutes since leaving the local train station, and she was already deeply aggravated by his attempts at conversation. Realizing he was incapable of recognizing her social cues, she decided to submit to his questioning. "I work for Vavasor. I'm a journalist," she replied, a tinge of defeat in her voice. "You don't say. I use Vavasor," he chortled, brandishing his clicker. His response was livelier this time, possibly because he had unconsciously worn her down into participating in the conversation. Pretty much everyone in Britain had one of the ubiquitous clicker devices. These small, pocket-sized clockwork machines were designed to be portable versions of the larger and more cumbersome logic engines. Vavasor was commonly referred to as an information depository. When someone sent correspondence to another person's clicker, the information depository would hold the message in its information banks until it could be retrieved. There were several information depositories, each vying for customers by offering additional services. Vavasor, like many others, offered news reports, articles, and other forms of written material that could be displayed on the clicker if they used their particular service. "What do you write, huh? Maybe I've read something you've written." His tone was as if he had the Queen herself in his cab. "I usually write economic pieces," she explained. "I recently had an article published about the problems that they're having in Vienna. Did you read that?" The driver looked into the rearview mirror at her, with slightly less interest than before. "Sorry, I only read about the football." His previous upbeat manner was now slightly deflated. "I wondered if you wrote about that." For the remainder of the journey, Beatrice got what she had initially wanted: silence. The driver barely said anything more to her. The two of them sat quietly until the cab pulled up onto the reasonably long driveway of the building where the gala was being held, the window continuing to rattle all the way. After getting out of the cab, paying the fare, and straightening her black formal skirt, plain white blouse, and beautifully elegant black feathered hat, she headed in. The building hosting the company's gala was one of the larger facilities used by the company's private army. Most larger companies of that era had a private army, ranging from small forces of a few hundred soldiers to great military forces numbering 300,000 or more. Some companies had armies larger than the standing British Army. Beatrice had wondered why they were holding the event outside of London. There were buildings on the company's premises in London that could have more than adequately catered the gala's nearly 1,000 guests. Whatever the reason, it was irrelevant to her now that she was there. Two of the company's soldiers stood at attention on either side of the large brick entrance archway. They didn't move, speak, or do anything as she passed between them and entered the building. She had decided to leave early for the event in case the train from London was delayed or she couldn't quickly get a cab from the station. Since neither outcome had occurred, she was roughly an hour early. She loitered in the building's main antechamber, not knowing what else to do in the meantime. On the wall, mounted in an ostentatiously carved oak frame, was a painting of the company's owner, Edgar Alexander Vavasor. His demeanour in the painting was powerful and stern, gazing down upon the room and glaring at anyone who might look up at him. "Can I help you, madam?" asked a short, posh-looking man who had caught sight of her while passing from one of the connecting rooms. He had white hair, a small, well-trimmed white moustache, and wore a small pair of gold-rimmed pince-nez perched unusually far down his nose. "Hello," Beatrice immediately responded, startled. "I'm here for the gala." The little man's face gave away his annoyance. It seemed to have morphed before her eyes, becoming stern and cold. "You are early," he informed her. "What is your name?" A shiver went down Beatrice's spine. What did he want her name for? Was she in trouble? "It's Marlow," she stuttered. "Beatrice Marlow." She gave her surname first, as if she were being scolded by a schoolteacher. She contemplated for a moment how he indeed had all the hallmarks of a cruel schoolmaster. The little man pulled a clicker from a pouch on the side of his belt and fiddled with the display. They stood there for a minute in silence while he continued checking something. "Beatrice Marlow," he finally interjected, breaking the tense silence. "Yes, He made several noises while reading, occasionally mouthing certain words silently. "Fine," he finally said, looking up to meet her eyes. "The gala will be held on the field outside. You won't be seated until the other guests have begun to arrive. In the meantime, please wait here. I'll come and get you when it's time." And as suddenly as he had entered the room, he left again. Beatrice waited in the antechamber for no longer than 5 minutes before she heard the footsteps of someone entering the room. Her head swivelled instinctively to see who it was. "Beatrice?" the woman called before Beatrice had time to recognize her. "Drusilla!" Beatrice called back. She stood up from the bench she had been sitting on and walked towards her. "Always the early bird, Beatrice," Drusilla cheerfully joked. "To be honest, I thought I would be first." Beatrice took Drusilla's hand and gave it a squeeze in greeting. "I've only been here about 10 or 15 minutes, Beatrice whispered, almost as if it were a big secret, although I did get chastised for my earliness. Drusilla jokingly feigned shock by covering her mouth. The two had known each other since they both became journalists for Vavasor. Although they never worked directly with each other, their occupations meant they saw each other about twice a month on average. It had, however, been slightly longer since the time that Beatrice had last seen Drusilla, and she was overjoyed to see her now. Drusilla's attire was much more elegant than Beatrice's practical ensemble. She wore a beautiful emerald green ball gown with white ruffs around the sleeves and neckline. Judging by the volume of the skirt, she must have also been wearing a great many petticoats. She carried a matching emerald green bag and a white lace fan. In her long red hair, Drusilla wore a silver tiara adorned with various faux white flowers. "You look wonderful. I feel a little underdressed now," Beatrice laughed. Though her feelings were true, she now worried in case the other guests were dressed like Drusilla. "Don't worry, dear," Drusilla reassured her. "You look very professional." Beatrice hadn't expected her to say professional. There were worse things she might have said. As time passed, several more early birds showed up. The small group now gathering in the antechamber was making a sufficient hubbub to draw the attention of the little man Beatrice had met earlier. He strode into the room, into the midst of the waiting group, and made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called loudly, "I would like to thank you all for coming to our gala. We will be taking our meal outside this evening, so if everyone would be kind enough to follow me, I'll take you there." He marched off, and the guests followed him. As Beatrice exited through a door at the back of the building, her eyes fell upon the area where the gala would be held. She was struck by how wonderful it all looked. It was something out of a fairy tale. Hundreds of small, round tables were set up on the grass. Each table was covered with a brilliant white tablecloth and set out with all manner of cutlery. Distributed amongst the tables were portable gas lights, glowing with a dreamy, dim light that gave the whole event a feeling of intimacy. "This must have cost a small fortune," Drusilla whispered. Beatrice nodded in agreement. The little man with the preened moustache had informed them they could sit wherever they wished. He then started asking the guests if anyone was coming to the gala whom they would like to have directed to their table upon arrival. As various names were given, he noted them down with the table numbers in his clicker. "And you, Miss Marlow, is there anyone coming you would like to have directed to your table?" he questioned, still with the same demeanour as before. "No, thank you," she responded, quite shocked that he had remembered her name. "Very well. Enjoy your evening," he added before moving on. Drusilla and Beatrice took a seat at a table right in the middle. "Isn't this something?" squealed Drusilla with delight. Both women had come from less affluent origins, and although they had become better off due to their employment, neither of them had been to such a gala before. "It's wonderful," Beatrice responded. She looked up at the sky. Whether it was due to the lighting of the area or cloud cover making them invisible, there wasn't a star to be seen. There was nothing up there but blackness. "I do hope it doesn't rain this evening," she added. The two of them inspected the various knives, forks, spoons, and other utensils laid out in front of them. Beatrice didn't have the first clue what any of them were specifically for. Her heart began to race slightly, and she became nervous that she wouldn't know what to use or when to use them. She resigned herself to the idea that she would just follow the lead of the other guests and hope for the best. The evening moved on, and the tables quickly filled with arriving guests. Several soldiers from the company's army appeared to have been tasked with directing guests to their seats. The little man was conducting everything. Beatrice could see him talking to guests, calling over the soldiers, and pointing out tables. "Would you like anything to drink, ladies?" another soldier asked gently. He appeared to be playing the role of waiter for the evening. All the soldiers at the gala that evening were dressed in their ceremonial uniforms. These uniforms included a navy blue jacket adorned with golden braided cord, gold embroidery, ruby red tasselled epaulets, and a high collar. Their trousers matched the ruby red of the epaulets. They wore black boots, and each soldier had a ceremonial sheathed sword at their side. The soldiers showing the guests to their seats also wore black shako caps with a large matching red plume on top. The caps also had a golden ornamental plate engraved with an image of Mercury, the company's emblem. "If you would be so kind, we'll have 2 glasses of white wine, thank you," Drusilla requested. "Very good, miss," the soldier replied politely, and marched off to get their drinks. "So, Bea, darling, how have things been? It seems like forever since we last had a proper talk." This was true. Although Drusilla and Beatrice did see each other at work, there never seemed to be time to have a conversation about anything beyond work. "I know, we always seem so busy," Beatrice remarked. "However, I don't have very much to tell, to be honest. Life is just work, work, work. It must be the same for you, I guess." "Exactly," Drusilla laughed. Despite previously not seeming to have much to talk about, Beatrice and Drusilla talked for a long time. Their conversation covered everything from Drusilla's plans to buy a new house to the beautifully embroidered cloth napkins emblazoned with a striding Mercury and the name of the company. After a while of talking and a couple of glasses of wine, the meal began. It was an exquisite affair, with course after course served to the guests. They initially dined on oysters, deviled eggs, and cheese straws. This was followed by a soup course of green turtle soup and a fish course of salmon en croûte. The entree offered a choice between beef, lamb, or game pie, accompanied by roast vegetables, various types of potatoes, Yorkshire puddings, and gravy. Finally, they were presented with a small selection of delectable little cakes and cheeses. After the meal was complete, Beatrice and Drusilla enjoyed a small glass of sherry each. With inebriated laughter, the two of them giggled as Beatrice regaled Drusilla with the story of the chatty cab driver from her trip to the party. The other guests at their table, although they didn't know either of them, chuckled along as well. "I've never met such a chatterbox," Beatrice laughed. "Although, like I said, once he knew I didn't write about the football, he very quickly became quiet." At that moment, all the eyes at the table looked up behind where Beatrice was sitting. Sensing someone was behind her, Beatrice turned around. Standing directly behind her, in the most immaculate suit she had ever seen, was the man from the portrait she had seen earlier in the antechamber, the owner of the company himself, Mr. Vavasor. He was a tall man standing over 6 feet and wiry thin. His well-maintained head and beard of silver hair glimmered in the gala lights. His immaculate suit featured a perfectly tailored black coat, a waistcoat embroidered with silver thread in the shapes of flowers and leaves. He wore a billowing silver silk cravat and a matching silver silk handkerchief peeking from his breast pocket. The artist who had painted his portrait had aptly captured the intimidating nature of the man, but had failed to convey the charm and charisma that exuded from him. There was a warmth about him which drew an immediate affection, reminiscent of the love a child feels for a doting grandfather or uncle. Beatrice, Drusilla, and the other guests at the table immediately jumped to their feet in his presence. "Mr. Vavasor," Beatrice whispered. "Oh, please, please, everyone, be seated. There's no need to stand on my arrival." He spoke in a distinctive, gravelly, resonant voice. As if under a spell, everyone complied with his request and instantly sat back down. "Miss Marlow, Miss Ingram, I've come to thank you for all your hard work, my dears." Beatrice was shocked he knew her name. She then noticed, hovering off to the side, the little man she had met earlier. She assumed that he must have been Mr. Vavasor's assistant and had given him her information. "It's my pleasure, Mr. Vavasor," the two responded in unison. "I must say I'm so proud of our company's journalism department. It's your hard work and writing prowess that continue to make us the largest information depository company in Britain," he said, praising them without a hint of flattery. He continued at length thanking them and talking to them, and he stayed with them for a long while. He asked if they were happy in their jobs and whether there was anything he could do to help them. "Oh, it's no problem, Mr. Vavasor. Everything is perfect," Drusilla insisted. The little man came over and whispered something to Vavasor. He nodded and turned to the two women. "Very well then, ladies. I apologize I have to run off. However, I have a party to run," he joked, and everyone at the table laughed. "If you're ever at the head office, please make sure to come by and say hello." Vavasor then got up and strode off with his assistant. After his departure, all the guests around the table began commenting on how down-to-earth he was, how charming he was, and what a genuine person he seemed. Vavasor had only been gone a matter of minutes before his voice boomed across the gala area. A great many phonograph-like devices had been set up between the tables, playing his voice. "He's giving a speech," Drusilla exclaimed. She pointed towards the front of the gala, where, indeed, Vavasor was standing on a stage at a podium. "Ah, they're playing recordings of the speech so everyone can hear at the same time." Beatrice watched on with excitement and wonder about what he had to say. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his resonating voice audible, if only with a slight crackle, coming from a nearby phonograph. "I wish to thank you all, investors, employees, and everyone who has come to our little gala tonight." He paused, and everyone began to clap. "Our great company, Vavasor, which my father started nearly 34 years ago, began from humble origins. As I'm sure you're all aware, we began manufacturing components for logic engines, though with my stewardship, Vavasor has diversified, grown, and become an economic behemoth." Once again he paused for dramatic effect, allowing the crowd to clap. Everyone in the crowd was transfixed by the man and his words. Beatrice looked around at them, hungry for every word he had to say. "We have surpassed all of our competitors and have become the leading information depository company in the country. Furthermore, our introduction of a journalism department so many years ago has served us well in our endeavours. Our careful curation of the news the public reads has allowed us to mould opinions and sway minds, fostering an environment devolved and unregulated in which we have thrived." His remark referred to the so-called Great Devolution of 1857. At that time, the public had become so exasperated with the government, forcing the devolution of power from the country's main government to hundreds of miniature parliaments around Great Britain. This, as Vavasor had remarked, had helped them to thrive as a company. It had, however, also been one of the major contributing factors that had led Britain to become the dangerous, crime-ridden place it was. Beatrice's blood ran cold in her veins. Vavasor had admitted that they specifically curated the news to further their own whims. Although she had been a child during the Great Devolution, and therefore had had no part in it, she wondered what role she had had to play in other events. "That being said," Vavasor continued, "we now have a greater challenge ahead of us. The question is this: once a company has reached the pinnacle of its industry and has taken the lion's share of its market, where does that company go next?" His question hung in the air. All the guests, apparently unconcerned with his remarks about news curating, looked at him with awe, awaiting his answer. "The answer is simple. We expand." he explained. We will seek out new foreign markets, markets we can control. We propose achieving this task with this. Vavasor gestured skyward. The guests in turn moved their gaze upward. Many powerful lights distributed around the perimeter turned on, pointing into the air. It immediately became obvious to Beatrice why she hadn't been able to see the stars before. In the sky above them, hovering silently, perturbed only slightly by the breeze, was the largest airship Beatrice had ever seen, anyone had ever seen. This is the Mercury, Vavasor explained proudly, the largest machine ever created by the hand of man. 1 mile in length and 1/3 of a mile in breadth and height, she is made strong with a skeleton of steel, capable of carrying enough munitions to destroy a city, able to remain airborne at heights beyond the range of any projectile, able to remain airborne for weeks at a time without having to land. She truly is a marvel of engineering. The guests looked up at the Mercury with wonder and astonishment. It was a sight to behold. The only question remaining is, what do we do with this? It is our ambition to use our technological dominance to reclaim that which was lost to us. I speak, of course, of the lost colony of America, and by God we will bring that country back under British control, under the control of Vavasor. That country, still reeling from its civil war, is tired and war-weary. Now is the time to strike, and strike we will. The Mercury, like its namesake, will deliver a message. We are Vavasor, and we are coming. At Vavasor's final words, the crowd erupted into cheering and clapping. A hubbub of celebration filled the night air. To Beatrice, a darkness had descended over the gala. Many of the soldiers were distributing pamphlets to the guests advertising victory bonds, which they could invest in. She was handed a pamphlet, and weakly she took it, but only stood there in silence. "Isn't this fantastic?" Drusilla cheered. Beatrice tried to smile as she looked at the excited face of her friend, but it wouldn't come. Suddenly, a brass band started up, playing the Anthem of Vavasor, sung to the tune of Beethoven's Ode to Joy. All the guests participated in singing. Vavasor strong and mighty, the world hath not seen your like, bringing the world together under a banner clear and bright. Vavasor strongly together, onward forever we shall march. Information, knowledge, wisdom, all of these things that we guard. Beatrice, as motionless and as cold as a statue, stood amidst the crowd of euphoric guests, wondering why it was only she who feared what that night had wrought. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more in future, please comment, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel to grow. And there are other stories in the playlist on the channel. Please feel free to give them a listen. And finally, a special thanks to those who have already viewed, liked and subscribed.